Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to talk about celiac disease in children, the hidden clues, how to clearly diagnose these patients, and the long-term management. So, if you look at celiac disease, the hidden clues, celiac disease, usually you would think of a patient who comes with diarrhea, just not responding, and you are, then testing for celiac disease. But then you could have something like a hidden or a silent celiac disease, which is an asymptomatic celiac, where a patient may have a positive TTG, IgA, positive serology. You've done an endoscopy and that shows villus atrophy, but the patient has no symptoms. So that is known as a silent celiac disease. Atypical celiac disease is where they don't have GI symptoms, but they have extra intestinal manifestations such as iron deficiency anemia, osteoporosis, infertility, and elevated liver enzymes. In fact, we get a lot of patients in which it's just iron deficiency anemia not responding, and we do an endoscopy and we detect them to have celiac disease. So if you look at hidden celiac disease, there are three types. The latent celiac, where a patient may be genetically predisposed. That means they may be HLA DQ2 and DQ8 positive. There may be a family history of celiac, but the patient has on endoscopy normal mucosa and they are asymptomatic. So these are the patients who do not have villus atrophy, but they are HLA-DQ, DQ8 positive. So you have to keep a close follow-up of these patients because they may develop active disease later. The silent celiac is what I spoke about, the hidden one, in which they don't have any symptoms, but they have a villus atrophy on endoscopy and they have positive serology. And you usually get this when you are doing a sibling screening, and you have to give them a gluten-free diet to prevent complications. Atypical celiac is the ones who come with an extra intestinal manifestation such as iron deficiency, short stature, or osteoporosis, or hepatitis. And on endoscopy, they have a villus atrophy present, they have a positive serology, but they do not have the classical GI symptoms of abdominal pain or diarrhea. And they also require a gluten-free diet. If we look at hidden celiac, almost worldwide, 1% of children are supposed to be having celiac disease. So we are missing out on a lot of patients. And the global pool prevalence ranges from 0.7 to 1.4% by region. Recently, there has been an increased observation of celiac among the Swedish and the US pediatric cohorts. Probably in India also, we are missing out on a lot of patients. And if you look at this data from the European Journal of Pediatrics, they found that among all the patients in which they did endoscopy, they still had patients who were 83% and 91% who were suspected to be celiac and they were missed. So who is at risk? Who are these hidden celiac? Patients who have a genetic predisposition, that is the HLA-DQ2 and DQ8 positive. So patients who have an autoimmune overlap like type 1 diabetes, autoimmune thyroiditis, patients with genetic syndromes like Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, Williams syndrome. And the most important is the siblings. So if you have a first degree relative, your chance of having a celiac is 1 in 7 as compared to 1% in the general population. And then there are environmental factors that can increase your risks, like the infant gluten timing. So there are some studies which says that if you introduce gluten before 3 months of age, or if you introduce gluten after 7 months of age, so early onset of gluten or late introduction of gluten can lead to celiac disease. If you have a dysbiosis in the gut, that means you have a leaky gut, then again you could have increased chances of gluten allergy forming. And early viral infections with enterovirus and adenovirus have been known to cause celiac disease. I mean, not known to cause, but have been associated with celiac disease. So if you look at hidden symptom load, it's like the celiac iceberg. The symptomatic celiac is just above the waterline like an iceberg. Very few patients you will actually see chronic diarrhea, abdominal distension, weight loss, failure to thrive. Below the waterline, the iceberg is even bigger, which is your silent celiac, which contains your silent celiac or the extra intestinal manifestations of celiac and your latent celiac. So iron deficiency anemia, chronic fatigue, short stature, delayed puberty, enamel defects, can all be the part of your Iceberg model. Now, what are the hidden clues in the clinic? Whenever you have an unexplained iron deficiency anemia, do a CBC, ferritin, and do a TTG-IgA. When you have a short stature, do a bone age, do a TTG-IgA. If dental enamel defects, do a serology. If you have unexplained elevated liver enzymes, do a TTG-IgA. If you have these skin manifestations like dermatitis herpetiformis, which I have shown you the image, then immediately serological testing and endoscopic diagnosis would be required. Now, the question that always comes when you're doing a diagnosis is when to do an endoscopy. It's easy to do a blood test, but when do you do an endoscopy? So if you have a symptomatic child, or you have a child where you're screening like a first degree relative, or you're doing in a type 1 diabetes mellitus or a Down syndrome, the first thing that you do is do a total IgA and a TTG-IgA. If you have an IgA which is on the lower side, then you do TTG-IgG, or you do a DGP-IgG. So you do the IgG. Now, if you've done a TTG-IgA and it's negative, then it's unlikely to be celiac, provided your total IgA is normal. If your TTG-IgA is positive but less than 10 times the upper limit of normal, you will need a endoscopic upper GI biopsy, and you will have to do the Marsh classification. And if you have a TTG-IgA which is more than 10 times the upper limit of normal, you don't go ahead with a biopsy, you do an endomysial antibody, that is the IgA test, on a separate blood sample. And if that is also positive, your celiac disease is confirmed and you don't need a biopsy. So when will you not need a biopsy? A TTG-IgA more than 10 times the upper limit of normal and an anti-endomysial antibody which is positive. When will you do an HLA typing? It is not required for routine testing, but when you want to rule out celiac in ambiguous cases. And if you have a negative HLA, then celiac is extremely unlikely. When will you say celiac on biopsy? When you have a Marsh classification 3A. That means with Marsh 1, only your intraepithelial lymphocytes are increased. Marsh 2, you have a crypt hypoplasia, and Marsh 3, you have a villus atrophy. So the moment you have a Marsh 3, any one of them, A, B, C, you think of a celiac disease. Now, why do we do TTG-IgA as the first marker? Because it's highly sensitive. It's 97.7% sensitive. Specificity is less. EMA has got good sensitivity, good specificity. And DGP-IgG has got not that great sensitivity and specificity. So you use it only when you are unable to do a TTG-IgA. Now, whenever you do a endoscopic biopsy, remember to take 4 samples, 4 tissues from the duodenum D2 and D3, and take 1 from the bulb, because it's a patchy involvement, so you don't want to miss out on any site. You grade them according to Marsh 0 to 3, and then you, based on the serology and the histopath, you diagnose celiac. So this is the Marsh classification, as you can see in the image. With Marsh 3, there's severe villus atrophy, and if it's mild, marked or complete, you label it as 3A, B, and C. So now let us look at ambiguous cases. So if you have a TTG-IgA which is normal, but you are still suspecting celiac, first you rule out total IgA, that should be normal. You use alternative tests like TTG-IgG or DGP-IgG. And then if you still have a strong suspicion, do an HLA DQ2, DQ8. Suppose you have a patient who's come to your clinic who's already been on a gluten-free diet and you're not sure whether this is celiac or not. Don't go ahead and do a biopsy straight away. You introduce gluten again for 2 to 8 weeks. Do a repeat serology after introducing gluten. And then if the serology is positive, go ahead and do a biopsy. And when you have these potential celiac where the serology is positive but they're completely asymptomatic with normal histology, you need to follow them closely, and you will not keep them on a gluten-free diet, but you may repeat a serology and probably a biopsy in 6 to 12 months. So remember, when you give gluten-free diet, it doesn't mean only not eating wheat, you have to keep for hidden sources of gluten. Sometimes in supplements you may get gluten. Sometimes the atta that comes from the chakki may be mixed with, if you are getting jowar or bajri, that may be mixed with gluten. So you actually have to tell them to have a separate chakki at home where you are not using wheat to grind the atta. So don't share those chakkis. Then again, in craft material, you may get a little bit of wheat or sauces or marinades and soups. Then these patients may be micronutrient deficient. So at baseline, you must do their iron, folic acid, vitamin D, B12 levels, zinc levels. And at 6 to 12 months, again, check for the deficits and growth parameters. And probably every year, do a thyroid function and a complete serology to make sure that these patients are under control. With a gluten-free diet, it's not very easy to have them on a gluten-free diet, and because there is a very high risk of social isolation, and gluten-free food are often 2 or 3 times more expensive than gluten-free. So how do you manage these patients? The moment you have done a serology and histopathology, then every year do a serology and see that TTG IgA becomes negative. That tells you that they are very strictly adhering to gluten-free diet. If it's not becoming negative, that means they are still eating gluten in some form. At 2 years, you may do an endoscopy and see whether the mucosa is healed. If the patient is asymptomatic, you may avoid that. At 5 years, you may screen them for osteoporosis, check with a DEXA scan. And lifelong, you will have to keep on monitoring them for a lymphoma risk and other comorbidities. Now, are there any drugs that are available for treatment of celiac disease? Remember, these drugs are an adjuvant therapy and they are not a dietary replacement. So you will not be able to get away with gluten-free diet. And there are a lot of drugs in the pipeline. That is larazotide, which is a tight junction regulator, PRV15, TAC101, and Z1227. Now, I'm going to show you how each drug works at what level. So first, for that, you need to understand what is celiac disease. Celiac disease is an immune-mediated disorder where after ingestion of gluten in susceptible individuals. Who are susceptible? The ones who have HLA-DQ2 and DQ8. It results in damage to the small intestine. The gliadin from the gluten is processed and presented to CD4 T cells, which initiates an inflammatory reaction that causes release of interferon gamma and activation of CD8. This activated CD8 increases the small intestine epithelium with gluten exposure and mediates the intestinal damage. So it's your interferon gamma, the CD8 that are causing the problems. Interleukin-15, again, another drug. So if you go back to this picture, you can see how interleukin-15 is affecting. So PRV15 is a monoclonal antibody and it is used to treat gluten-free diet non-responsive celiac. And it blocks interleukin-15, which is the cytokine that contributes to the inflammation and damage. Larazotide is a peptide, tight junction modulating peptide. It reduces the persistent celiac disease symptoms. It was found very excellent in phase 2 trials in 342 adults who continued to experience symptoms despite of gluten-free diet. And it decreased the symptoms, but in a phase 3 trial, because of financial cost, it was discontinued. Now, TAC101, it is composed of gliadin encapsulated in PLGA nanoparticles. Now, what is this? It's kind of an immunotherapy. So you give gliadin specific immune tolerance. So this PLGA is a carrier molecule, nanoparticle, which delivers specific antigens that induce tolerance. So this TAC101 is piggybacking on this nanoparticle and going inside and causing immunotolerance. And in a phase 2 trial, 33 patients were restarted on gluten, and with TAC101 they found a reduction in the interferon gamma, which I told you is one of the factors that causes the inflammation. So it causes a kind of an immune tolerance. It's still in a phase 2 trial. The Z1227 is an oral drug. It inhibits the transglutaminase 2, which helps to prevent the gluten-induced intestinal damage. And it prevents the trigger. It prevents the trigger of the immune response damaging the small intestine. So the key points here are that in celiac disease, there are hidden clues in extraintestinal manifestations and atypical manifestations. So think beyond the gut, follow the ESPGHAN guidelines, easier, utilize the no biopsy diagnostic pathway when eligible. Lifelong gluten-free diet is needed. You have to ensure adherence and monitor them. Screen the groups like type 1 diabetes, Down syndrome and relatives early. And be aware of all the new therapies that are coming out in the pipeline. Thank you.